scheduled to sit at 1A, which is that one right there. They gave us that one Bravo back there, so you can sit there.
Gave it us, meaning security, or
Yeah, so one of us.
okay, gotcha.
So whoever you want to sit, they can take a seat right there. As long as no one takes it. Did have a reserve side.
Is it okay if we stand back?
Yeah, you can stand back here. You can stand right there. You can stand
Yeah, I'll
right
just
there.
stand back here. I'll put the shit back. If you want to sit there, that's fine.
Hi, everyone. If you could please remain in your seats, our next session will begin just momentarily.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for bearing with us. For those who weren't here for the last session, my name is Dan Baer, and I'm the Senior Vice President for Policy Research at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. And it's a pleasure to have so many of you with us today, both in person as well as I know there's a large audience online. The next speaker we have is a real superstar, Deputy Secretary of State Rich Verma. Rich started his career in the Air Force, actually, as a veteran, and then served as foreign policy advisor to the Senate Majority Leader, Harry Reid. He was an Assistant Secretary of State during the Obama administration under Secretary Clinton, and then the U.S. Ambassador to India. He's also held leadership roles in the private sector. He's a lawyer and has worked at MasterCard. And he is now serving as the Deputy Secretary of State for Management and Resources under Secretary Blinken. I could go on about Rich, but the one thing I will say about Rich is that Washington is a town in which it's often easy to find people who will say mean things about other people. And I would dare anybody to find anybody in Washington who has a single mean thing to say about Deputy Secretary Verma. He is admired and trusted around town. He's a wise voice on policy, and he's seen as a kind person to work with. And it is a pleasure to welcome to the stage Deputy Secretary of State Rich Verma.
Thank you so much. Dan, it's great to be with you, someone who I've known and worked with for probably 16 years, and we go back a long ways, and you've done so much in your career, and just grateful for our partnership and everything you've done, and including here at Carnegie. It was great to have the president here and to meet him backstage. This is such an important set of issues at an important time. Grateful to the Japan Society for hosting us. Of course, Carnegie, the Peace Foundation for continuing the important discussion that they started 2 years ago. I will say this dialogue kicks off a very busy time for our work with Indo-Pacific Island partners. We're pleased the partners in the Blue Pacific will be meeting soon. Next week, President Biden will host the second U.S. Island Pacific Islands Forum. 2 weeks later, on October 11th, we'll be at the IORA Ministerial, and that's just looking 1 month out. But I would say far more important than the hectic schedule of meetings and ministerials up ahead is what all this engagement actually delivers, besides job security for those of us interested in the Indo-Pacific. It means we're building partnerships and relationships among nations and regions rooted in diplomacy, founded on the cornerstones of economic cooperation, development assistance, and people-to-people ties. It means we're hearing about the challenges our island nation partners face and their priorities for actions in areas like climate resilience, maritime security, and global health. It means a robust and candid exchange of ideas and challenges and obstacles and opportunities, listening to our partners' concerns as we share our own. What this means is we in the United States are determined to be an enduring partner to the islands of the Indo-Pacific, determined to be responsive to your priorities, determined to help you tackle 21st century challenges and make the most of new opportunities, and determined to do it with all of you together. Rebuilding partnerships, strengthening coalitions, forging new ties with countries of every size and station. That's the heart of our approach to the Indo-Pacific and to our diplomacy across the globe. And that couldn't be more important than in this moment as we stand at what President Biden and Secretary Blinken have rightly called a critical inflection point, when the post-Cold War era is ending and a new age is beginning, when the issues, the competitions, and great matters before us require cooperation and collaboration wherever we can find it. And that includes our deep and growing connections with Indo-Pacific island nations, extending from the Western Indian Ocean, where I had the great honor and privilege to visit in May, to the heart of the Pacific, a vast expanse of the planet where we share interests in confronting everything from climate change and resilience to cybersecurity, maritime security, democracy promotion, human rights, and more. And as we act on these shared interests, we will never lose sight of our common vision for this region, an Indo-Pacific that is free and open, resilient and connected, prosperous and secure. Now, making that vision real is a matter of both word and deed for the United States. Part of that is the depth of our partnerships and the breadth of our commitments to the safety and security of the region. It's something I saw firsthand serving as U.S. ambassador in India. They never told me the job description of being U.S. ambassador would be to land on 3 aircraft carriers in the Indian Ocean. But it was an indication of our incredible work in the region to provide security, to increase maritime domain awareness for our partners. I heard what the president said about AUKUS, and I will just say I take a different view and think it provides a very important security architecture for the region. I would say the same thing about the Quad. And so, look, it is not just one thing, it is a variety of things. And in a major speech that Secretary Blinken delivered just on September 13th, last week, he spoke of, quote, a world where individuals are free in their daily lives and can shape their own futures, their communities, their countries. And we believe our actions in the Indo-Pacific match that promise. And yes, that includes defense and security ties and regional architecture, but it's so much more as well. It's our economic bonds, it's our humanitarian collaboration, our diplomatic and multilateral engagements. So whether through bilateral discussions, regional forums such as IORA, or the Pacific Islands Forum, high-level meetings like next week's U.S. Pacific Islands Forum Summit, or our cooperation with third country partners like India, Australia, Japan, the Republic of Korea to deliver benefits for the region, we are robustly engaging on island nations' priorities. Just since last year, the United States has established a special envoy to the Pacific Islands Forum, reestablished the regional USAID mission in the Pacific Islands, accredited our first U.S. ambassador to the Maldives, and opened new embassies in the Seychelles, Tonga, and Solomon Islands. These steps are about showing up. It's about, to borrow a famous phrase from up the street on Broadway, being in the room when it happens, being present, being in the dialogue with our counterparts so we can generate new conversations and ideas. And I will say I was honored to be there in the Seychelles for the reopening of our embassy. Ideas about what a free and open Indo-Pacific region looks like, that's what we're talking about. Ideas about what is needed to achieve our goals. Ideas about how we can increase climate resilience, preserve our oceans, invest in sustainable development, and grow our economies in fair and equitable ways. By coming together, we can also generate new partnerships. For instance, back in May, I met with the IORA Secretary General in Mauritius to reaffirm the United States' commitment to expanding collaboration with IORA on key priorities, including the climate crisis, support for the blue economy, global health, and maritime security, as we address key global challenges together. And again, I heard what the President said about the importance of IORA, and I agree with that. Climate resilience, connectivity, maritime security, inclusive development. These are the concerns we hear about most often from our island nation partners. I heard these concerns at the IORA Secretariat. I heard them from national leaders in the Seychelles, Mauritius, Comoros, and I am hearing them here. Our nation shares the collective commitment to address these concerns. We believe that our vision for the Indo-Pacific is only possible if island nations across the region are thriving. It's fair to say, however, that expressing a vision is far easier than actually achieving one, particularly when that vision spans 2 oceans, 3 continents, and involves more than half of the world's population and nearly 2/3 of the global economy. We also recognize that each of our island nation partners are different sizes, different neighbors, different histories, different economies, and different societies. Each nation faces significant challenges like the climate crisis or a pandemic in its own way. So each of us must decide how we best address these problems which transcend national borders, and none of us can truly answer them on our own. We in the U.S. think the best approach right now is the one Secretary Blinken laid out in his speech at Johns Hopkins last week, an approach he called diplomatic variable geometry. Now, I don't know about you, but I stopped thinking about geometry when I gave up engineering after college and went straight to law school instead. But let me spend the next minute just summarizing what that approach actually means and finish by giving some examples of how we are using it in the region. As the Secretary said, you start with defining a problem. And because I'm limited to 10 minutes here, let's look at one challenge, and that's facing the climate crisis in the Indo-Pacific. And that's where the variable approach works best. Of course, we cannot design one partnership, one program, or a one-size-fits-all solution. Instead, we use a variable diplomatic approach, forging the partnerships and programs we think are best suited to achieve the outcomes which support a resilient Indo-Pacific region. This approach means partnering with Sri Lanka, the Maldives, and other South Asian countries to increase access to affordable, secure, and reliable energy. It means encouraging economic cooperation through MOUs like the one Comoros and Gigawatt Global signed in March to invest up to $100 million over 5 years to develop renewable energy. And it means caring for the health of our oceans through programs like the Resilient Coastal Communities Project in Mozambique, which will improve the sustainable management of marine and coastal ecosystems. On the Pacific Ocean side, we are advancing our climate change commitments made at last year's historic summit, with Pacific Island leaders working closely with the U.S. Trade Development Agency to mobilize more than $400 million in financing for climate projects which advance Pacific Island countries' net zero goals. We are also contributing more than $90 million in disaster risk reduction and resilience programming. Region-wide, we are looking at ways to capitalize on the G7's Partnership for Global Infrastructure and Investment Initiative, which aims to mobilize hundreds of billions of dollars to close the global infrastructure gap. Now, all of these programs, indeed our entire variable diplomatic architecture in the region, comes out of extensive consultations and discussions with regional partners, discussions like this one today, national level summits, local discussions about assistance programs. And they rely on the understanding built when our citizens engage with one another, when our communities get to understand each other, when our students study together, when our professionals work together, when our public servants and leaders sit down together and collaborate in pursuit of the vision we share and the future we seek. This adds up to a true dialogue, a discussion that goes beyond talk and leads to concrete action and lasting solutions. I've seen it firsthand. And ultimately, that is and will remain the core objective of our diplomacy with our Indian and Pacific Island nation partners across the region and around the world. I appreciate your time. I appreciate everything that all of you are doing in the room to advance the set of relationships in the Indo-Pacific and your incredible commitment to this important initiative. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Deputy Secretary Verma, so much for that speech. And I was personally really thrilled to hear you reference Western Indian Ocean so many times, which is my own personal reflection on U.S. Indian Ocean strategy. But before we delve into the conversation with you, I want to take a moment to acknowledge Prime Minister Mark Brown, who's in the audience. Thank you for being here with us. Look forward to your conversation, Prime Minister. The speech was, of course, it was great in laying out the balance U.S. creates between Indian Ocean and the Pacific and the different aspects of it. And like I said, I really enjoyed you highlighting from your recent visits to the Western Indian Ocean, Mauritius, Comoros, that we don't really hear that much about. The Indo-Pacific is a reality today, and we just had the President of Sri Lanka speak, and I wanted to draw the attention to the Indo part of the Indo-Pacific strategy that the U.S. writes. The U.S. strategy, in reality, on the Indo-Pacific only mentions Indian Ocean twice in the entire document. So the attention, of course, on the Pacific is understandably higher, but given the shifting interest and engagements, I wanted to ask you, where does the Indo part of the Indo-Pacific sit within the larger U.S. government's outlook and interests?
Yeah, thank you so much for the question. And there is a reason why one of my first trips, I'm only 6 months into this job, was to the Western Indian Ocean and to Seychelles and Mauritius and Comoros. I have to say, most of my friends were quite jealous that I got to go to Mauritius and Seychelles. But it is such an important part of our strategy. And I think what we have to do a better job of is making sure people understand the integrated approach that we have. We have seams in our government between, the State Department and Defense Department, but within our departments, we have seams as well between AFRICOM, CENTCOM, and PACOM, between our South Asia Bureau, our Africa Bureau, and our East Asia Bureau. And sometimes it appears as if, we're taking one approach in the kind of Pacific, one approach in South Asia, and one approach in the Western Indian Ocean. And I really want to try to dispel that as much as I can, because the strategy is meant to be integrated. It is important in its totality. We view the Indian Ocean as critically important. As I said, we have, depending on the issue set, climate change, for example, we have a different approach depending on what the needs are. So to answer your question directly, the Indo part of it is huge, but it is meant to be integrated, right? And it is meant to be viewed as a continuum with potentially a very different set of challenges, but I would argue the principles apply. Free and open, rules-based, peaceful resolution of disputes, pursuant to the kind of post-World War II order, investment, transparency, commercial ties that are, again, resolved through basic rules of the road. That's what we're seeking, and a peaceful, better, prosperous way of life for the people who live there. We have a great history of collaboration, and we're going to do even more in the future.
I'm sure a lot of people would really appreciate you outlining the sort of the interconnectedness between the different departments, whether it's on the DoD side of it, whether it's on the state side of it, because I think that's been one of the criticisms, that dividing an ocean into the continental silos of South Asia, Middle East, and Africa, or Indo-PACOM, CENTCOM, and AFRICOM, I think has created some sort of a silos in between. But definitely with you, I think with your trip out, it really has been a renewed engagement to see that investment from the U.S. side of it.
Well, I also had a unique perch. When you're sitting as the U.S. ambassador to India, you don't get to pick one part of the Indian Ocean that you're trying to advance and support and committed to. And I not only went to every state in India, I traveled all along, as I said, working on maritime domain awareness, working with the Indian Navy, the U.S. Navy. And I think that relationship, again, is one part of the broader fabric that we've tried to weave together for this strategy in the Indian Ocean and Pacific region.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned maritime domain awareness. I personally remember when you were ambassador to India, the relationship between the Navy to Navy had sort of started really getting into more of the complex exercises between that. So I hope that this would extend out to the wider Indian Ocean.
People have asked me, why do you do all the exercises? Like, what are you practicing for?
Right.
We are practicing in the event of humanitarian and disaster response. We are practicing in the event of something more serious and more severe. But look, we also have a history where we didn't ever practice at all. Right? We have, just think about U.S. and India, 76-year history, of which our military cooperation is just of the last 17 or 18 years. And so we have a lot of work to do to actually rebuild up just how we communicate with each other, how we work with each other. And so, but it has, I used to say to people, when you go to one of these exercises, you come away energized and hopeful because you see how well we do together and what that can mean for peace and security and prosperity in the region.
I wanted to sort of ask you on a specific Indian Ocean strategy from the U.S. government point. I think, if I'm not wrong, the last formal written U.S. government's Indian Ocean strategy was in 1977. There hasn't one been written in the 21st century for the 21st century problems and issues. And from what you've outlined today and the way U.S. is looking to with the reopening of the embassies, the engagements, going all the way to Comoros, it's a island nation you don't hear often even in the Indian Ocean conversations. So absolutely thrilled. do you think, is there any thinking within the US government across the different agencies on perhaps a new Indian Ocean outlook in the 21st century?
Yeah, look, I don't think I would necessarily wait for a document that says new Indian Ocean strategy, right? I think you have to look at what's actually played out over the last 2 decades, and really the last decade in particular. As I mentioned, this integrated approach, the importance of the Western Indian Ocean, but across different pathways of cooperation. So climate, trade and investment, humanitarian disaster response. I look at what our USAID teams are doing in energy transition, in green climate, and so much more. And of course on the security side too. So this weaving together of the strategies has already occurred, and it's part of our thinking, and it's part of our approach. So I'm actually quite encouraged by as I said, the breaking down of the seams, the working together, and working closely with our partners.
Just want to take a moment for our audience. If there are any questions, there are QR codes on your seats as well as online and the YouTube links. If you'd like to put in any questions, but I know you're pressed for time and you don't have very much time left with us. But from my end, while the questions come in, I wanted to talk about resources and management. And this is actually the only forum which brings together the islands of both the Indian Ocean and the Pacific, providing under one umbrella. Often when we talk about engagement, conversation naturally goes to resources and commitments and capacity and capabilities, and we had that conversation earlier today as well. How much of capacities, what does capacity allow you to invest really after the announcements of initiatives? How does your office manage this balance, given both sides to the US are equally important, the Indian Ocean and the Pacific, strategically, but has different levels of priorities and investments? Does focus on one side mean pulling away resources from the other? Because that's the other conversation and critique that we hear.
Yeah, no, not at all. And in fact, look, you have to make some choices, and the State Department's being called upon, and USAID colleagues are being called upon to do more in more places in the world. But again, if you just look at what the president is going to be spending his time on over the next few weeks and months, it's this incredible focus on the Pacific Islands, on the Indian Ocean region. He was just in India and Vietnam. And when I look at the amount of resources we've actually committed to the region, it's billions of dollars just over the last couple fiscal years. And that's in a variety of categories. As I said, in both what our USAID colleagues are doing with development, on climate, our time and investment, what the Development Finance Corporation is doing, what the MCC is doing. If you look at the totality of the investments in the Indo-Pacific region, it's really significant. It's really ramped up. And it is the right thing to do when you look at, as I said, the spanning 2/3 of the kind of economic activity in the world is taking place in this region. The average age of the population is 35 and younger. When you look out through 2030 at the kind of dynamism of the region, you'll have the most internet users in the world, the most college graduates. You'll see a real excitement in this region. I think that's our commitment, is to be there, to be present, and to be a part of this incredible growth story.
Thank you. We are already slightly over time, but I'm going to take my space as the moderator to ask one final question on behalf of this dialogue. We had a really fascinating conversation with the president of Sri Lanka, who mentioned AUKUS and Quad both.
Yeah.
And I think these are two groupings that have held some interest, both sides of the Indo-Pacific, on Indian Ocean and Pacific. As the US Deputy Secretary, with leaders both present at the forum, both from the Indian Ocean and Pacific, what would you like to say to the leaders of the island leaders of the Indo-Pacific on both AUKUS and Quad, and how that can be engaged?
Look, I think, as I said, every island nation we have to have our own individual partnerships with. We also have to work in regional bodies like IORA, which are so important. We have to hear their concerns and be responsive to them. We also have to be clear-eyed and cognizant about the threats in the region. We have to be concerned about those trying to upend the post-World War order, those who do not want to play by the rules of the road. that want to use cyber tools maliciously, or those that want to build weapon systems that threaten others, or engage in, even when engaged in investment activities or engaged in kind of the kind of development trap for nations. So we have to be clear-eyed about that as well. So you can't just say we're just going to work on climate, or we're just going to do food security. The security piece of it and the kind of regional architecture piece of it is also important, and I would say critically important. And it can work in conjunction with the strategy that we have with our island nation and partners. I think there's no inconsistency there at all, and I think the strategies actually are quite harmonized.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Deputy Secretary. Unfortunately, we do not have any more time, but thank you so much for taking time and coming to the forum and sharing the U.S. State Department's thoughts and perspectives on island nations and its engagement. Really appreciate your time today.
Thank you very much. Yeah, appreciate it. Thank you.